Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for spending part of your day with us. Thank you also to our friends at ASAE for welcoming us to the virtual stage today. We'll wait just another moment for folks to sign on, but I'll briefly introduce myself and encourage you all to do the same. My name's Laura Scruggs. I'm on the Accredible team, and I am based outside of snowy Baltimore, Maryland. So please, if you'd like, drop us a line in the chat. Say hello, let us know where you're joining us from or what you're eager to learn more about in today's discussion. And for those of you who are just signing on, if you are here to dive into how associations build credentials that employers trust, you are officially in the right place. We have a lot to unpack today, but before I turn it over to your official host for today's discussion, a couple of quick housekeeping reminders. We are leaving some time for a brief Q&A after we wrap up the presentation today. So please submit your questions for Ryan using the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen in Zoom. I'll be behind the scenes answering some of those questions directly and then selecting some to be answered live later on. Lastly, today's session is being recorded, and our wonderful hosts from ASAE have shared some details about how to access that on demand in the chat. So, with that said, I'm thrilled to turn it over to my teammate Ryan Greaves to officially kick us off.
Cool. Thank you, Laura. And as she mentioned, I'm Ryan Greaves. I'm the Senior Director here at Accredible. And for those of you who may be hearing our name for the first time today, Accredible is the world's leading digital credential platform. So we've been around since 2013, and in that time, we've helped nearly over 2,300 organizations like Google, Walmart, IEEE, International Association of Privacy Professionals, American Board of Emergency Medicine, wide sort from higher education to association to product certification and workforce, issue and verify nearly 100 million career advancing digital badges and certificates. So before we dive into today's content, I kind of want to understand a little bit about who's on the call with us. We're going to throw up just a quick poll. I would love to learn a little bit about kind of your number one priority for certification and continuing ed this year. So just take a second for weigh in on the poll. Usual suspects are leading. Super helpful. Yep, and increasing program revenue and retention renewals. Always a couple favorites. Excellent. I'm just going to share these so I think everyone can see. Yeah, so increase in program revenue, non-dues revenue top, increased member retention and renewals, second, gross certification and CE enrollment is third. A little further down is employer recognition and improve impact outcomes. Yeah, that is very par for the course as far as what we see kind of across our customer base, especially in the association realm. Super helpful, just context. No matter where you are and what you selected, I know some of those are, hey, all of the above for many folks as well, whether it's revenue, retention, employer recognition, or proving impact. They all hinge on this underlying questions, are your credentials actually working? And because many of us in the room have already done the hard work, right? Your launch certification programs or learning programs, you're maybe issuing badges or certificates, you've built maybe even learning pathways or career pathways. But today I want to challenge us to ask some harder questions. Are those credentials opening doors? Are they being trusted by employers? And are they driving renewals, referrals, or repeat enrollment? Because far too many programs, the credential get issued and then it disappears. It doesn't get shared, it doesn't get seen, it doesn't influence decisions. And today's session is not about it's not about issuing more credentials. It's about designing credentials that actually perform, that are usable, discoverable, and trusted in the moments that matter most. And to show you why that matters, let me paint just a quick scenario for you. Imagine being handed a beautifully designed boarding pass. It looks official, it has your name, your destination, a flight number. TSA was actually had pre-check going on, and that was all good to go. But when you get to the airport, the airline can't scan it, the gate agent doesn't recognize it, and you're not sure which terminal to go to. Technically, you hold proof that you belong on a flight, but in practice, you're stuck. And that's what happens when we issue digital credentials that aren't designed to be usable, not just earned, but understood, trusted, and most importantly, acted upon. And most associations have solved that issuance, whether it's still with paper credentials or they've switched over, or maybe a combination of, but still doing paper certificates alongside digital credentials. But issuance alone doesn't guarantee impact. If a credential isn't clear, if it's not discoverable, if it's not trusted at the moment, a hiring manager reviews an application, or when a member is seeking advancement, that could even be, as they move into college or continue in education, it doesn't carry the value it should. And when that happens, it's not just the learner who loses. The association misses an opportunity to demonstrate relevance and reinforce that value of membership. So that visibility is such a missed opportunity, especially when your members are trying to advance their careers and employers are actively looking for proof of skills. And to kind of give you a sense of some of the research we've done over the last few years to back a lot of this up with real data, over the last 2 years at Credible, we've sought to clarify and quantify challenges and opportunities facing organizations like yours, specifically those who are offering any kind of professional certification, training, or education programs and awarding credentials to your learners and members to help them advance in their career. In 2024, our State of Credentialing survey focused on education and training leaders, aka credential issuers, and learners. We surveyed well over 1,000 learners. And one of the big takeaways was 96% of learners who earned a digital credential said it was valuable for their career, and nearly 80% believed it increased their chances of a job offer. Fast forward to this past year in 2025, we built onto that by looking at the other side of the equation. So we looked again at credential issuers, so many of the leaders that are on this call, as well as surveying over 500 HR and talent leaders, so employer side, to answer really 3 simple questions. First, can employers trust the qualifications they see from candidates? Second, do they actually see and act on digital credentials in hiring? And third, what are issuers doing or not doing to meet those needs? And to get that as answers, once again, we surveyed over the 500 recruiting leaders. We also surveyed nearly 200 certification and training leaders on how they design and deliver their programs. And together, those perspectives are kind of the backbone data set, as well as a lot of best practices, and give us a sharper view of what it takes to run credentialing programs that deliver outcomes for everyone: learners, employers, and issuers like yourself. One of the first major findings from that research is about trust. Employers told us that confidence in candidate qualifications is a real challenge. We're seeing this across the board with AI resumes and applications. In fact, 84% of HR and talent leaders say they've caught or suspected a candidate exaggerating their skills or experience. And because of that, 95% say they verify skills in at least some cases, and many verify for every single role coming into that company. And that's a huge amount of time and resources being spent just to make sure people are who they say they are. What employers are really asking for are better and more reliable signals of capability. And for you as issuers, this is the opening. Digital credentials, if designed well, can provide that proof and to begin to close that gap. Wendy Safstrom, who's the president of Sherm Foundation, one of the world's largest HR and professional societies, shared another perspective kind of in line with that. She said HR leaders increasingly recognize that skills and competencies are better indicators of job performance than traditional proxies like degrees. Digital credentials provide validated proof of capabilities, giving employers a more nuanced and equitable way to identify talent. That's truly the promise of digital credentials. They're portable, they're verifiable, they're shareable, and they're trusted. But that recognition alone isn't enough. The credentials also have to be visible in order to make a difference in hiring, right? Like they have to show up in the workflows and the processes and be visible to the folks that are actually making decisions, whether it's admissions at the higher ed side or it's employers as people are looking to advance their careers. But let me be clear, employers do want to see digital credentials. So in that same data, 91% of HR and talent leaders say they look for digital credentials when they review candidates. And 86% of them say when they see a digital credential proving a key skill, they're more likely to bring that candidate in for an interview. Yet, as you see there onto the right, only 46% say they regularly see digital credentials in applications. And I want you to take a second to think about that. Credentials are being issued Employers are looking for them, but the two just aren't connecting. And that's the critical gap, and not just about whether learners earn something, it's about whether they use it, whether others see it, and whether the credential performs in the moment that matters most, right? And right now, many programs are missing that hiring moment. So let me ask you this. I would love to take a peek at kind of where everyone is before we kind of go into a lot more of the details. How are you currently using digital credentials in your association? And it might be that first one. You're not yet issuing them, but I would love to learn a little bit more about the audience on where you're using digital credentials, digital badges. Excellent. Kind of across the board. So we have a lot still in the early days, which is great to see. We're definitely in the early days as an industry on not issuing digital credentials yet. My thoughts go out to many of you who have huge memberships and issuing all those paper certificates. Um, but yeah, we have a decent amount not yet issuing digital credentials, whether you're not issuing anything or maybe paper or PDF attachments, issuing for events, participation for CE or learning programs, and some kind of in the early days of developing true pathways. Excellent. Very helpful. Okay. Well, super helpful because that hiring gap we just looked at doesn't happen randomly. It usually shows up at specific design and system points, and that's what we're going to unpack next. So when we actually compare what learners want, so what we really looked at in 2024 with what employers want, what was the big lens that we looked at in 2025, the alignment is actually striking. They both want clarity, so what has been learned at what level. They both want evidence and what it took to earn whatever it is, whether it's a certification, a skill, or course, a boot camp. They both want visibility, so they want to be able to have credentials that are being found and acted upon. And employers overwhelmingly value third-party trust signals, which is also really key for a lot of the folks on this call, where you can add that validation and endorsement to other credentials as well. But when we look at what issuers actually provide, there's definitely a gap. Only half specify the level and include evidence of learning in their credentials. And while 94% of employers say endorsements increase trust, so those are endorsements that especially come from academic institutions, employers, or industry associations, just 31% of issuers provide them. And this is what we mean when we say credentials are being designed for invisibility, not intentionally, but by default. So even when learners and employers are aligned on what they need, their credentials still often fall short. And that's not because we don't care. That's because the programs that happens next, the middle ground there. This is a quote from a learner on this from a perspective from a learner side. Laura Vertugi, she earned a micro credential, so a shorter, more condensed course that is typically smaller and cheaper than maybe a 2-year or 4-year degree. What many of you maybe offer in a badge or a micro credential or certification. She earned it, but she didn't even realize she had earned it until after the fact. She said, I got the credential without realizing I was earning it. I received it through the process of earning my master's because I had finished a series of courses that aligned with specific skills, and that earned me a micro-credential. Once I learned about it, I claimed it, I opened it, and thought, wow, this is important, and I want to get more. And that's the moment that, wow, this is important, is what we all should be designing for, right? But it can't happen if learners don't know what the credential is, what it means, how to use it. And invisibility is not neutral. It's a lost opportunity. And so what I want to spend the rest of the time talking to you all about is what makes a credential truly usable to both learners and employers or admissions officers who are trying to decipher and receive these credentials on what that actually looks like in practice. So far, we've talked a little bit about how credentials that don't get shared, don't get trusted, and they're not getting used. But that doesn't start at the moment that you actually issue a credential. The roots of many of these issues is actually inconsistency at the design level. And that's because half of credentialing programs lack any formal structure. So just 54% of issuers have a credential framework in place. That means for nearly half of all programs, there's no shared definition of what a badge means, what goes into it, how it looks, or how it fits into some larger system, right? Why is the current branding? And as a result, is what you see on the left there. It's credential sprawl. Learners don't understand the difference between badges, employers can't compare or interpret them, and internally, everyone is reinventing the wheel every time a new course or certification comes to the forefront. But structure changes everything. With a strong framework, you don't just clean up your badge library, you start building a system that can scale and that's understandable. And let's look at what a strong credential framework actually does and why that matters. A strong credential framework gives you more than just consistency, as mentioned. It gives you credibility, clarity, and control. It's how you make sure every badge communicates its level and meaning clearly, includes the right metadata. So any of the information, and I'll show an example here in a slide or two of what I mean by that if you've never seen a digital credential. A digital credential or digital badge typically has its own, if it's a true, open badge or follows the standards, it's its own URL, it's its own page. And in that page, in the data within that page, is all the metadata. That's all the information that shows the course description, the name of the course or certification. It's the skills that were acquired. It was whatever learning evidence, or did it have a test or an examination attached to it? What score did it have attached to it? You can embed all of that metadata into a digital credential. And so having the right framework, it allows you to articulate what metadata that you want to be attached to your digital credentials and how they fit into a bigger system of learning. So whether your goal is revenue, renewals, or employer recognition, structure is what makes those outcomes scalable. And this isn't theory. Here, a good example is that Junior Achievement USA has done this at scale, right? They've defined badge categories, they've tiered their visuals. I'm not going to go into great detail on their whole framework. We do have a whole entire framework guide with examples and everything as well. That's in our professional services team actually helps a lot of organizations build out their framework and governance model. But they've standardized those components used by over 100 affiliates across the country and their 4.6 million students that they have. That means every learner always knows where they are in the journey. Employers know what the badge represents and what went into it. And importantly, on the folks at this call, internal teams can expand without starting from scratch, as I mentioned. As a result, for them, they've achieved an 80% credential engagement rate, meaning 80% of the credentials that they're issuing to their learners who have earned them are engaging. They're downloading them, they're sharing them, they're adding them in their portfolio, they're sharing them on their news feed or embedding them in their LinkedIn profile. And they've had a 52% share rate to LinkedIn. So I mean, with learners sharing them, once again, to their news feed or in their certifications profile section on their LinkedIn. So learners are not only earning their credentials, but they're actively sharing them to showcase their achievements, which, if you see how that goes, increases visibility, awareness, and even renewals and enrollment for your programs as well. And so frameworks aren't just about quality control, they're about building systems that work for everyone. So now that we've seen the results of a great design and governance, let's look at what the usability and the valuable making credentials value actually looks like and what the best programs are doing differently. So I'm going to take you through kind of the 5 traits that we see that really make credentials actually work and are usable for both learners, admissions officers, employers. And when we talk about credential usability, we don't just mean whether the badge looks good or gets issued automatically. We mean, can a learner explain it? Can they share it in useful places? And can an employer find it, verify it, and recognize its value without jumping through a whole bunch of hoops? And as I mentioned, there's 5 key traits that determine whether a credential performs in the real work. We'll walk through each one of these in detail, as well as give you some really good examples for you to think about. And we'll start with the most foundational trait, which is explainability. So when somebody opens a credential, whether it's an employer, an admission officer, or it's the learner or your member themselves, they should instantly understand what it represents. What was learned, what was required, why does it matter? And without that clarity, a credential becomes just another icon on a LinkedIn profile, not a true signal of real skill or achievement. And so let's look at what makes a credential explainable and the most common breakdowns that prevent that. Um, this folds in a little bit more of the employer data here because, as I mentioned earlier, employers are already valuing digital credentials. So in that same survey, 97% said they're essential or a nice to have on, which is actually on par with portfolios and reference letters, and actually more useful than resumes alone. That's pretty mind-blowing in 2025 to say that digital credentials are more useful than resumes alone. And that's because everyone's resumes are starting to sound the same, right? If they're getting AI generated or at least AI edited, everyone can look and sound the same. What separates them is verifiable evidence that you, in fact, have this certification or you have this skill set or that you've earned this achievement. But that value depends on trust, and employers told us exactly when that trust breaks down. Vague skills, missing evidence of that learning, inflated claims, or as I mentioned earlier, amateur design, right? You have a hodgepodge of outdated branding elements, your badges look suspect, and everything as well. These aren't fringe cases, they're common and they're avoidable. They all relate, as I mentioned, to metadata, that structure and design, and not inherent flaws with the credentialing model. So let's look at an actual example of ones that make it truly explainable. This is an example from Geese College of Business. I could pull up a million other really great ones out there, but this shows you exactly when a credential is clear, credible, and self-explanatory. The credential includes a summary of what the learner completed, the skills they demonstrated, and the criteria used to assess them, all embedded right there in the metadata of the credential itself. The great thing about digital credentials and like a Credible's badges, for example, is they are open badge and W3VC standards is that data is portable. So as more systems, whether it's a learning and employment record, whether that's ATS system in the future that is ingesting data to come alongside resumes, all of that metadata is already captured for your learners, which is great. Now it can be actually actioned. It can be pulled into where a human can understand it as well as a machine can understand it. And this isn't just about good design. It's about trust building. When an employer or admissions officer opens his credentials, they don't have to guess. The meaning is immediately clear. What turns a badge into a signal is clarity. What did the learner complete? What did they demonstrate? Why does it matter and to whom? And who issued it? Does it look credible? And that last one's important. You'll notice the Geese brand is front and center here. It's not a Credible. It's not some platform branded badge. It's their institutional credibility is doing the work from the header all the way down to the footer of the page. They're obviously the branding of their credentials. It's their institutional credibility is doing the work. We'll come back to that a little bit later on why that matters when we talk about recognizability in just a moment. But even the most explainable credential doesn't matter if no one sees it. And so let's talk a little bit about that second trait, which is all about shareability and what happens after a credential is issued. So far, we focus on how credentials communicate meaning. Now we shift to whether they're actually being used. And even the best design badge loses power if they stayed buried in somebody's inbox, they received it, or mailbox if it's a paper certificate, or even a learning management system that has basic badging in many cases. If those badges stay in those systems, they're not being used and the power of the badge really goes away. Shareability means learners can bring their achievements into real world contexts. Applications, interviews, LinkedIn, portfolios, digital credential transcripts, their learning records. Let's look at what it takes to design for that kind of visibility and portability. Designing for usability isn't just about what the credential says, it's about what learners can do with it. Even the most beautifully designed badges lose power if it stays hidden, as I mentioned earlier. That's why leading programs make sharing seamlessly. They include pre-written LinkedIn captions and resume-ready language on the credential delivery emails and landing pages that say, hey, here's some example copy that you can use in your LinkedIn message, or here's some example copy when you're sharing this with a prospective employer. They're making it easy for the learners to not only understand what the credential is that they just earned, but also use it, right? They offer digital credential transcripts. Those are structured, portable records that unify those badges, certifications, and micro-credentials in a shareable learner snapshot. And they even enable digital resumes that help credentials show up in the hiring process, not just in a badge inbox. And friction, I will point this out, and friction is the enemy. We've seen that requiring a login or an account creation can reduce credential sharing by up to 75%. So if you want your credentials to travel, to truly be used out in the world, they have to be accessible and easy to share. And that's definitely often why we have a lot of folks come to us that are coming from paper and even still have learners or members that still value or want, undergraduate programs even at higher education, right? A lot of people still even love the paper diploma for a plaque or otherwise. But the problem is that doesn't travel very well, right? It's not very shareable, and it also doesn't include everything that went into that learning. So a lot of those things are why it's so important to build this into your credentials. But what what about when learners aren't the ones that are sharing? So when an employer is searching, that's where the next trait comes in, which is where discoverability comes into. So we've talked a little bit about how the learners can share them, but what happens when an employer is the one doing the searching, right? They're looking for talent, or this could be an organization that is looking for somebody that has your specific skills or your specific certification that you offer. What happens when other people are looking for those professionals or those people that are credentialed, right? Discoverability is what allows credentials to work without needing to be manually handed off. It turns those passive records into signals that can be found and acted upon. And while digital credentials are inherently more accessible than paper, discoverability still isn't automatic. It still has to be intentionally designed, whether that's through learning the learner sharing it, the indexing of the credential landing pages that I showed earlier, search optimized metadata, or online directories, which we'll talk about here in a second. So let's look about what some of the best programs are making their credentials, but not just visible, but also findable. So discoverability is really means when your credentials show up when it counts, not just when a learner shares them, but when an employer or somebody else is actively looking for qualified candidates. So in our most recent survey, 84% of learners say they want to be featured in a public directory to be connected with future opportunities. And over 800,000 did so in 2025 alone, just on our platform across credential issuers that offer directories. They want visibility, not just validation. And employers are leaning in. 75% say they either already use or want directories of credentialed talent as part of their sourcing process. But directories don't just benefit learners, they deliver tangible, value to you as an issuer. When learners know their credentials are discoverable, engagement increases, and when employers see your program show up in searches, it builds brand authority and demand. It signals that your credentials lead somewhere and that your brand stands behind them. Here's a perfect example from the American Board of Emergency Medicine's directory that features nearly 49,000 certified emergency medicine professionals who have opted in to be featured for future opportunities and a community, right? That's the other thing. They want to be connected to future opportunities, but it's also a community building effort. It can be used by hospitals, licensing bodies, employers, and even the public to confirm whether a physician is currently certified, demonstrating core knowledge, skills, and ability needed to practice emergency medicine at the highest standards. And whether they've maintained their standing through ongoing education, volunteer service, and professional participation. And emergency medicine, those details truly matter. Especially when somebody's applying for hospital privileges, joining a medical team, or being listed on a public referral site. This directory gives others a clear, real-time view of their professional status, its visibility, and its verifiability at scale. And for a certification body like ABEM, it reinforces the integrity of their process and the trust people place in their credentials. So that's the kind of visibility that creates real opportunity for both your learners as well as your program. And talked a little bit about visibility, but visibility alone isn't enough. Once a credential is found, the next question is, can I trust it? That's where verification comes in and where digital credentials have a huge advantage. Unlike paper or PDF, digital credentials are backed by evidence issued by a known organization, and they can be verified instantly. There's no phone calls, there's no guesswork. Verifiability is often overlooked because it feels like a technical detail, but it's actually a trust accelerator. So let's look at the data behind why verifiability matters and how to deliver that on that promise. Here's why verification matters and why it needs to be frictionless as well. 72% of learners want credentials that are verifiable and fraud resistant, something PDFs and paper simply just cannot provide, right? With Canva, with AI, you can replicate almost every type of certificate or paper credential with your own name, branding, and everything that you've earned. Digital credentials eliminate that immediately, just how the verification layers. 3 out of 4 employers say digital credentials make evaluation easier. And nearly all of them, 84%, have caught inflated or false claims on resumes, as I mentioned earlier. So this is a default strength of digital, but it only works if the credential is accessible, the issuer is clearly identified, and the proof is there in a glance. You'll see over on the right, this is actually just an example. If you go to any a credible credential, this is one from Databricks. You click on the verify credential, immediately it comes up. It says this is verified, who the issuer is, if it's still in good standing. So many of you might have certifications that need to be that expire on a yearly or every third year. This would show that. This would say, hey, they did earn this, but it now is expired. Or this is a great triggering mechanism for anyone that's interested in re-enrollment and renewals. There's triggering mechanisms to, especially our platform allows you to trigger those notifications back to that original learner saying, hey, you're up for a renewal of your certification, or here's a new course, and to bring them over to re-enroll them and bring them back into that. But the verification layer shows that this, in fact, is real. It's verified and backed up on the blockchain. That's whether you change LMSs, whether you change from a credible to another digital credential provider, that credential, it lives with the learner for their entire life. And the verification layer stays with them, which is really, really key. And so once somebody opens the credential, 2 things matter. Can they verify it, and do they trust what they see? And so we've just covered the verification. Let's talk a little bit more about that recognizability. Verification tells you that it's valid, right? But recognizability tells you it's credible, that it belongs to a trusted institution or an association and stands for something real. This final trait is about branding, consistency, and endorsement, the things that can really build trust at a glance. So here's what that looks like in practice. Recognizable credentials have really 3 things in common. First, the issuer brand is unmistakable. It feels official, and it feels like it belongs to your association, not a third-party platform, as I mentioned earlier. Second, the design signals hierarchy and rigor. So visual consistency reinforces that structure. As I mentioned, there's a difference between a badge and a certificate. There's a difference between one and many of these credentials. If you have a really defined framework and governance model, you might have your tiers or levels of learning already built into that design layer. And then third, endorsements reinforce that trust. As I mentioned earlier, 94% of employers say third-party endorsements really increase trust in hiring decisions, especially those from academic institution employers or industry associations. So here's an example from the National Health Career Association that not only has their brand front and center, but they've actually also partnered with an incredible partner, ours, American Council on Education, to endorse their credentials with academic credit recommendations. So that helps actually institutions and employers more easily evaluate the prior learning, especially in workforce training programs seeking academic credit or career relevance. This is just an example of one endorsement. You can imagine a lot of different ones. We always encourage people to look at their credentials. Is there a standards body? Many of you obviously are associations, so I could flip that question to you. Are there credentials out there in the world that you can add your credibility and lens to and stamp as an endorser of somebody else's credentials that also give you visibility and recognition and maybe even bring people into your world and your ecosystem as members? We have a lot of cross-pollination between especially higher education and associations where I'll go into it here in a second. The Institute of Industrial and Systems Engineers, they've partnered with, I think, 30 or 40 different higher education institutions to endorse their credentials. So it's co-branded. The curriculum's provided by IISE, and they're able to get their brand and their visibility and increase their membership because of it. But it also benefits and gives that institution, whether it's USC or the like, gives them more credibility because this is a third party endorsement as well as the curriculum that goes into it. So I'll give you an example of putting this all together. As I mentioned, IISE is a really good example. It's kind of done many of these things I talked about. Many of these traits that we went through, they've done that. So they've partnered with us at Credible. They transitioned from paper to digital credentials to not only meet those learner demands that I mentioned earlier for more accessible and shareable certifications, but they also streamlined their operations. So they freed up their staff for a lot of time-consuming manual tasks. And across 2,300,000 members, they've seen a 96% increase in credential sharing. Not that went from paper for a set amount sharing them to 96% increase of more people sharing their credentials and 123% increase in LinkedIn shares. So signaling boosting IISE's visibility, enhancing their learner employability, and providing IISE valuable metrics for tracking both educational and marketing outcomes, right? On a platform like ours, you can see all the data of who's sharing, where they're sharing, who are the big influencers. So that could be somebody that's earned the Lean Six Sigma yellow belt. They've shared it to LinkedIn saying they're excited and they're proud to have earned that. 40, 50 people see that on their LinkedIn and come across to their program pages to want to explore. Oh, I didn't know I could earn that. Oh, that would be valuable to my career. And it's kind of a credential flywheel where it's bringing more and more people into their program. And as a result, IISE has experienced membership growth. They've increased engagement and just as importantly, as many of you signaled earlier in the presentation, the membership value, right? Like everyone's looking for that holy grail of how do we increase more of the value to retain our members, to bring them back, to bring more people into our ecosystem. So this is a great way to signal and show that member value that you're given even beyond the certification or beyond the learning. And so we've walked through what makes credentials usable and trusted today. I want to kind of wrap with just a quick action plan to boil this down. You've seen the 5 traits that make credentials usable and trusted, and the program's putting them to practice. Credentials don't become usable or trusted by default. I think that's one of the biggest takeaways from here. They get there by design. And so if you want to, want revenue growth, renewal, or employer recognition, it starts here. Structure, making them explainable, making them shareable, making them discoverable, making sure and ensuring that they're verifiable, and that last one, making sure that they're credible. This is really just a blueprint. I'm just scratching the surface of some of the examples, and that final step is just as important, in my opinion, is the measurement, because the only way to know if your credentialing, your certification program is working is to measure it. And thankfully, we've made that fairly easy. But before we close, I'd love to know a little bit about how you're currently measuring credential impact. So if we could throw that up there, I'd love to see kind of what the mix is on how you're looking at your programs and measuring impact. What we usually see is a mix. Some programs track engagement, some learner outcomes, a few survey learners about career impact, and many are still tracking issuance alone. So how many people completed a course, or how many are earning a digital credential or certification. So this kind of falls in line with the same type of mix. Excellent. So we still kind of in the early days. I will say, don't feel bad. Many are still in the early days measuring impact. I know a lot of programs too, especially with the Pell Grant coming out, are really looking at those type of things to be able to have measurable outcomes so they can actually qualify for their learning or their certifications that kind of fall under that. So yeah, we've seen a kind of a wide variety here of not measuring yet is the top, tracking enrollment kind of second, engagement at the credential level third, and then surveying credential earners. That's great. So if you're not measuring post-issuance impact, you're not alone, as mentioned. That's why we've created actually a free practical learning outcomes guide and a ready-to-use survey template to help you capture what happens actually after a credential is earned. So from learner satisfaction to application to have they used it for advancement, have more confidence in their skills, or or used it for anything in their career or their learning journey. It's customizable, it's simple to send, and it's incredibly effective for capturing impact. And if you happen to be on here and you're already an incredible customer, it's even easier. You can actually automate the whole thing using our email campaigns functionality. So you can even just schedule this survey to go out to your learners. Let's say 6 months after somebody has earned a credential or certification, you could send them this survey to start collecting this post-credential results at scale. And because credentials aren't just the moment that they're earned, they're all about what happens next. And that's really what brings us full circle. Because as I kind of mentioned at the very beginning, issuance isn't the finish line. It's really the starting point. The associations that win really in the next 2 to 5 years won't be the ones just issuing more credentials. They'll be the ones designing credentials that are trusted, they're visible, and they're measurable. So the question really isn't about are you issuing credentials, it's are they working? And if you really want a clear roadmap for how to do that beyond what I ran through today, happy to talk more, happy to answer more questions here in the Q&A. Also want to point you to our State of Credentialing report. As I mentioned earlier, 500 HR leaders data from there, just shy of 200 credential issuers from associations to higher education to workforce. If you want the full data, the benchmarks and the case studies, it's free, it's ungated at stateofcredentialing.com. It's built to help you assess where your program stands and where it can go next. So with that, Laura, I'll bring you back in. We'll help us with some audience Q&A.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, folks who have already submitted questions. We do have some time to answer live, so if you have a burning question that you haven't submitted yet, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen so I see that in time to share it with Ryan. One, I think we went over in some detail, but probably not with this explicit framing, which is just the difference between a digital credential and a micro credential as you see it.
Good question. So this is not the dictionary.com definition, but how I'd see that so a micro credential could be separate from an actual digital credential or digital badge. So micro credential by semi definition is just a micro version of learning. So you take something that maybe used to be a full semester course and you're taking one piece of that. So that might just be around a skill, that might be around one specific proficiency. It's just condensed learning in typically a shorter span of time. Typically, if it's cost associated with it, it's just a smaller fee versus maybe a larger 2-year or 4-year degree or some larger certification. And so that's by definition more of what I think about when it's just micro, learning, more digestible, and it's often at the time that somebody needs it. So higher ed's a really good example of this, where often when they're bringing a new course to market, for example, or a new degree to market, it's typically many semesters or years in advance that they have to do all the due diligence and all the passing of that to get it to market, right? A micro credential, they can spin those up typically of this new skill that the workforce or the employers are asking for. We could maybe partner with an association that is already providing that, or we could spin that up literally this semester or within the next few months. And so that's what I think about when I think about a micro credential. It's more real, a little bit closer to real time, a little bit smaller, digestible, typically cheaper for the learner, and they maybe can package it in a way and go on with their their learning or their career. Digital credential, which can take two formats, that could be a digital badge, so more typically visually it's more of a round or smaller or badge, or a certificate, digital certificate. Both of those fall under the digital credential category. And by definition, a digital certificate has to be all those layers that I mentioned earlier, right? It has to, especially if it adheres to the actual standards that employers, HR associations, and the credential issuers and platforms itself are all trying to adhere to, so they can move across different wallets and learning employment records and all the like. A digital credential actually is a true web page. It lives with the learner. Ours, for example, live on the blockchain, so there doesn't matter what system or whether somebody stops using that specific digital credential platform, that credential lives with the learner. It's actually a credential page. It's a URL that's specific to that learner. Everything associated with that page is specific. So in theory, you could earn a micro credential, and how you recognize it and how you verify it and give it to the learner is through a digital credential. That's the visual and the verifiable layer of that micro credential. So I hope that makes sense. Hopefully, I didn't just talk in a circle, but they have a lot of overlap, but they're not one and the same also, if that makes sense. Some people refer to them in the same realm. They'll say a digital badge is the same as a micro credential. We see them a little bit differently because by definition, like a digital badge, digital certificate is truly its own thing because that could be attached to a degree, that could be attached to just attending a webinar. There's a lot of different other use cases of a digital badge or certificate.
Awesome. Thanks for the extra detail there, Ryan. We got a lot of questions about endorsements, and I think one of the central themes is around adding validation, adding some integrity to the value of the credential that our members are going to seek to use in the real world to either advance in their careers within their current organizations or seek their next career opportunity. Veronica had a question. They're seeking to set those educational standards in her industry. Is this something that we normally help with? They have certification programs and designations that members can earn, but they want to help make that known.
Mm, that's good. That's great. We do not, we can help facilitate those conversations. We have, as I mentioned, 2,300 credential issuers on our platform that are issuing, millions and millions of credentials per year. And so we help facilitate to make intros to say, hey, here's a association or a certification body out there that is looking to endorse more credentials based on this criteria or this parameters. We can put that signal out into the world or help kind of facilitate those intros. We do not do the connection as far as making sure that this one's partnering with this one. Where we bring it through, where we really come in is not just the facilitation, but I'll go really quickly back to the NHA example, is once you have that partnership in place, we can bring that whatever layer of validity, we can bring that into the actual credential page. So this is an example from American Council of Education. It brings through their credit recommendations. So you can see this is applicable for 3 hours of credit transfer for a tuition course. Now, a college or university still needs to do their own assessment to say, yes, we will accept those 3 credit hours. But we have all kinds of different ones of partnerships that work. So happy to, if you want to reach out, happy to see if we can facilitate any intros or point you in the right direction of ones that might be interested in your endorsement. And then once again, as you get to that point, we can definitely bring them through to the credential so the actual information is embedded into each credential that goes out.
Yep. Great detail there. There has also a question about earning criteria, specifically around some maybe higher stakes credentials. And so we had a question around some digital credentials platforms effectively validate your diploma or credential, but they lack clear specifications needed to earn the recognition. How are we addressing that limitation?
So as a kind of third party verification layer, we do not we will never tell each issuer what goes into their learning, what consists whether it needs to have a test or an exam. Based on data, we know that both learners and employers or admissions officers or whoever's coming in contact, they value more credentials, especially obviously if it's higher stakes, it has the test or examination attached to it. Where we come into that, where we do have a strong opinion, is we are pro filling out every piece of metadata that you can possibly attach to a credential. So back to that earning criteria and the exam scores or the fact that it had an exam or it had a project that was assessed or attached to it. We encourage you to use all of those metadata fields that are on the backside when you're starting to develop and design a credential. You can fill out all the different forms that went into it. So it could say a participant had to take an exam that was proctored. You can fill out all that information. You can even add the test score, so it's built into the credential itself. And so hopefully that answered your question. Once again, we don't require that because everyone is issuing different credentials for all different reasons, from participation all the way to a higher stakes credential. We just encourage people that especially if it had some sort of earning criteria or an assessment or project based, to include that in there as well. So, and then the last thing I'll say is the learner. We don't verify this on our end, but the learner themselves can also upload their own evidence too. So if they did have a portfolio that was attached to a certain credential or certification, they can add that so it's attached to the page as well. So,
Yep. That's a great detail there. And I'll just drop another link in the chat here to the technical side of making sure that for those high stakes credentials, that earning criteria is met and then communicated in the actual credential. We are proud to work with a number of different proctoring solutions, both digital and in person. And those are great ways to, for example, automate issuance based on certain test scores or based on certain other criteria that's being met. So happy to answer
Fair point.
specific questions about certain integrations if you have those, and we'll definitely share the link to do that as well. Ryan, I think we have time for a couple more questions. So I'll share one with you about credential frameworks. Catherine noted that design of these different kinds of credential badges is really important for the brand. And so she asked if we can share any association examples of how badges or micro credentials might be portrayed differently. Or I know that you, as our
Yeah.
brand leader, have a perspective on that that you might want to share as well.
Yeah, we have plenty of examples we can definitely share. There's a whole guide we can also provide a link to on why you should have a framework both for internal teams, just have an understanding of as you bring new badges, certifications, courses to the market, to have a normal kind of process that they need to go through. Um, but this is another area where we can make recommendations. We have a lot of folks that, especially as they have sprawl and they have a lot of different business units, or at the higher education has a lot of different colleges or university. They're typically going over something like this, and you'll have a different. So here's an example of Junior Achievement USA, where one of their dimensions, right, is professional development. You can see that they use that kind of teardrop icon as kind of the representation of their, versus a micro credential is much more of that. Um, is that a hexagon? No. You see the
I think
bottom
so.
left one. Don't. Good thing I'm not getting quizzed on shapes. The bottom left there, right? They wanted a significant qualifier or outline for what a micro credential versus a all the way to the right when they call a credential. So typically, it depends on the organization. We have a lot that maybe their badges or micro credentials are typically like maybe badge format, and then they're like premier, maybe that's their higher stakes, or all the way into some like capstone credential. Maybe the capstone credential you're going to reserve for the certificate. So it looks more official and more that traditional square or rectangle format that you see over the right. Everyone's different. We help people work through those processes, but and we have plenty of other ones. So, for example, Wharton Executive Education and many others do both. Every time you earn something from them, it's both you earn a badge and a certificate at the same time. Our platform allows you to issue both at the same time to the same learner. So it totally, I know that's a non-helpful answer, but it totally depends. And for them, the last thing I'll say here too, like Dimension 2, they built more dimensions into their badge, based online, based on proficiency. So it could be just a participation badge, gets like one line. If it actually takes some sort of work, so that could be a project, or they had to do an on-site internship or something, maybe that's two, versus maybe something that was actually examination or whatever is three. So there's all kinds of parameters that you could build into it. We always encourage not to over engineer it also too. You want them to be recognizable and understandable both internally as well as externally too. But you can really pull these in to your brand and make them feel both the design as well as the elements you can bring into these credentials that make them and allow you to scale as you bring in new courses and certifications.
Yeah. And Ryan has now led our team's efforts around doing this survey multiple years. And in 2024, I'll direct your attention one more time to the chat. We surveyed learners instead of employers to get a sense of what the demand might be for this type of model, where we have micro credentials that are part of a constellation of skills and experiences that your members are developing. And then there might be a capstone or a
Mhm.
professional certification that all of those micro credentials stack up to. And a lot of that demand information in terms of how much learners actually want something like that, or to know what their next step might be in their career development journey or in their continuing education journey. I just dropped the link to that full report in the chat as well.
Great.
Um, Which is, I think, a great segue to Jack's question, which might take us home today, which is around understanding what the demand might be for digital credentials. If there is a sensible way to test or assess a market for the opportunity with credentials, especially if there aren't any obvious signals of a high need.
Good question. We've actually led this for through our professional service. We've led it at a couple different organizations to survey whether it's their members or some part of the industry that they're really intrigued by on what is their perception of digital credentials or whether they are interested in them. I will say the when we surveyed, as Laura mentioned earlier, in 2024 with our state of credentialing survey, I was very intrigued. Like I'm in the space, but I thought for sure most learners have no idea what digital credentials are, even the ones probably that have earned them. We're still in the early days. Completely wrong, both on the learners as well as last year on the employers. Um, it's very tough to ask a learner, do you want something if they don't know what that something is? And so the great thing in what we did with 2024, and I encourage you to go back and read that, is we didn't just ask them straight out, like, do you want a digital credential? We did ask a question like that. Do you paper certificate versus a PDF attachment versus a true digital certificate or digital credential. We did ask questions like that, but we also ask what type of traits do they want? Do they want something super shareable? Does verification matter to them? Do they want something that lives with them for forever or in a wallet? All those type of things, right? Is it portable? And overwhelmingly, most learners want those things. Well, the problem is, or the opportunity for you is all of those things go into a digital credential. They're not, unfortunately, they're not attached to a paper certificate, right? The most you can fit on a paper certificate is name, your brand, maybe the level or the course that is attached to it, maybe when it was earned and if it has expiration, but it doesn't have any of that information, additional information that you can include in digital credential. And of course, the shareability really tanks now I have to capture a screenshot or attachment. And you as an issuer also lose out on a lot of that data when they do share it and when it goes to, you can see the enrollment coming back. So yes, you can certainly survey your members to see if they're interested in this, but that's my biggest caveat is don't just ask them straight out. Do you prefer these different formats? Ask them the additional questions that get to the crux of like their usage and what they value, because that'll tell you a little bit more about what they truly need beyond your learning or your certification that you're providing.
Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for your really detailed questions. I've just dropped a ton more resources in the chat. Thank you all for hanging in with us as we augment a lot of information that we wanted to cover with you all. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you, ASAE, for welcoming us onto the virtual stage. And again, thank each and every one of you for taking time out of your day to talk about digital credentialing and the opportunity therein for associations like yours. On the screen is a highlight of the newsletter that we issue just once per month, but we cover tons of detailed examples from the association space and beyond for those people at any point in their credentialing journey. So I encourage you to follow that link and sign up for that monthly newsletter. And if you'd like to continue the conversation with our team, we are always happy to connect, whether, again, this is something that's a pilot project that you've got on the back burner or something that is an absolute strategic priority to scale in 2026 and beyond. So I've shared a link to schedule an intro conversation with us in the chat. On behalf of the Incredible team, thank you again for being here, and we look forward to seeing you at future events. Have a great rest of your day and a wonderful week, everyone.
Thanks all.